remakes and remasters have been released at such a frequent rate. This can be a wonderful thing as they update games that nowadays have heavily outdated graphics and mechanics. But I think it's also important to remember that not every single game needs one. Fans of the originals also respond in one of two ways. Either they love the remasters/remakes, or they hate them. Then you have those kinds of people who bitch about a remaster or remake even if it's done perfectly. If they can't come up with an existing reason to hate it, then they'll make one up. All those topics led me to create this video and provide my own take on it, which is vastly superior to everyone else's who has or ever will end up making a video about this subject. Yeah, keep telling yourself that, Jesse. Starting with some bad examples of remakes or remasters that should have been handled better. To clarify, I'm not saying they're bad all around. More like the pricing. So don't go twisting my nipples. The Last of Us Remake. While it's undeniably a gorgeous game, with a few new features like the collectibles you pick up actually being physical objects this time around, filters, skins, and cheats, it still doesn't warrant buying at full price, which is $100 in Canada. Sometimes it goes on sale for $40 or $50. Still though, man, $50 should be the default price. I basically got the game for free because it was recently added to the PlayStation Plus catalog. I heard that enemies were reworked. Apparently, they flank you in the remake, whereas in the original, they don't. Funny thing is, I recall them flanking you in the original as well, meaning they don't react any differently than they did in the original. I played the Part 1 remake on hard mode, for the two people who are wondering. I know. I'm a scrub compared to you people who played it on Survivor or Grounded. I am beneath you, I'm just a peasant, okay, and you are almighty, infallible gods. Making matters worse, the multiplayer function present in the original is gone, and there are no new story beats or optional paths players can explore within the remake. If those things were present within the remake, then that would help justify the outlandish price. The remake of The Last of Us Part 1 came out in 2022. That's under 10 years after the original came out. You can replay the PS4 remastered version and it still doesn't feel outdated. Because, well, again, it's not that old. Meaning, it didn't need a remake. The Horizon Zero Dawn remaster may not be quite as expensive, but it's still $60 or $70 in Canada. It also released less than 10 years after the original. I think I'm seeing a common pattern here. Then, you have the recently announced Days Gone remaster. Did we really need a remaster of this game? Like, really? No, we didn't. The PS4 version on the PS5 is already a remaster in itself. While I'm happy that Days Gone is getting more attention, Sony should stop wasting money on making pointless remasters, or remakes, whatever, and start remaster/remaking games that actually deserve it. Like Medieval 2, The Legend of Dragoon, Gravity Rush 1 and 2, all three Infamous games, the Killzone, Resistance, and Little Big Planet trilogies, Drakengard, Twisted Metal Black, War of the Monsters, Kinetica, or Bloodborne, to name a few. How big are the differences between the original Days Gone and the remaster? I mean, are transitions between gameplay and cutscenes finally seamless? There is a few new game modes thrown in. Even then, it still feels unnecessary. Can't say that enough. Apparently, the Days Gone remaster will be $10 for players who already have the original and $50 for those who want to buy the game by itself. It'll most likely be closer to $15 in places like Canada, seeing how the remastered upgrade for Zero Dawn costs $15 in Canada. While $15 is not an outrageous amount of money, it's about the bigger picture. Every single remastered PS4 game should be free to players who already bought the PS4 version. That would make people a lot happier. Someone might see this video and say something like, the self-entitlement of you gamers, I swear. No, the self-entitlement of these companies thinking that everyone should be okay with their shitty decision-making. If the originals came out several decades ago and were outdated pieces of turd, then fair enough. But they're not. Far from it, actually. What do you guys want to bet that they're going to end up remastering the first Norse God of War game at one point? $15 says they're going to do it. I mean, they already remastered Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us Part 2, Until Dawn, and Spider-Man. Why the fuck not?
Sony, producing all the remasters or remakes that you didn't ask for since 2020.
This remake/remaster trend from Sony reeks of desperation. There should be a rule. Games should be over 10 years old before they are remastered or remade. Otherwise, you get your ass spanked by an electric fly swatter. Perhaps the one silver lining for this announcement is if the Days Gone remastered does well enough, Sony might finally greenlight a sequel. Some people, of course, will defend this choice. They'll say something like,
"But Jesse, you had no problem paying full price for the Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, Silent Hill 2, and Final Fantasy VII remakes. So why is paying full price for The Last of Us remake such a big deal?"
I am so glad you asked, because it gives me a chance to open up a big old can of verbal ass whooping. The difference between The Last of Us remake and those other games is they're not just a fresh coat of paint. They added in a ton of new additions, including story beats, optional areas to explore, and gameplay mechanics. For the sake of not spending a needless amount of time on the subject, I'll only highlight all the changes in one of those games, the Resident Evil 4 remake. Stealth kills, more side missions. You can seamlessly travel between areas without being introduced to a loading screen. The lake in the village is an area that players can properly explore now, including an intricate series of caves with stalagmites. You can reload while moving, parry attacks, switch weapons without relying on using the suitcase menu so often. Improved boss fights and enemy designs which make the game far more terrifying than the original. Ashley is actually likable, isn't completely useless, and doesn't require healing like Leon does. The relationship between Ashley and Leon is way better executed in the remake. Leon also feels much more like a real person than a cartoony action hero. The Separate Ways campaign was way better in the remake, largely because Wesker gets more screen time, including being physically present in one scene. The black-robed Vertigo is better utilized in the remake than she was in the original. She feels like a proper threat that hunts Ada down throughout a large chunk of her campaign and culminates in a solid-ass boss fight. Lewis is also playable in Mercenaries mode and gets more screen time in both Leon and Ada's campaigns. Each character in Mercenaries mode now has their own special abilities in the form of the newly added Mayhem modes. I'm not saying the remake of Resident Evil... Fuck off with your notifications, you cunt. I'm not saying the remake of Resident Evil 4 is better than the original in every way, but for the most part, in my opinion, it is. And to me, that's what counts. It's a remake that actually gives you a lot of bang for your buck. And that's why I gladly bought it at full price. By the way, I'm not implying that the original Resident Evil 4 has now been rendered a redundant piece of shit. It's still an amazing game and will always hold a special place in my heart. The original Resident Evil 4 is actually one of the games that aged better than most. Still, there are aspects about it that feel outdated, like the stiff movement
and those fugly ass motherfucking environmental textures. Goddamn.
Then, you have games like the Reignited and Insane trilogies that are like The Last of Us Remake, as in, they were more of an exact replica of the originals. The reason why those trilogies get away with it, though, is because they bundled 3 games together, remade from the ground up with recomposed soundtracks, for the reasonable price of $50 at launch. I think that's a really good deal. Furthermore, people actually wanted remakes for Crash, Spyro, or Final Fantasy VII for years. No one, except for the weird kid at the back of the class who eats his own boogers, asked for a remake of The Last of Us. All those games I mentioned that weren't The Last of Us Part 1 also have something in common. They released well after a decade the originals came out and were much more outdated as a result than The Last of Us is. If Sony released remasters or remakes of the games I said they should make, then they would sell like poplars from Futurama. We, the consumers, are trusting you with our money. You treat us right and we'll treat you right. Just no happy endings. For the final part of the video, I'll be discussing people's reactions to remasters and remakes. I understand developers should be very careful when remastering or remaking games. They should make sure that while modernizing the game, they also keep things like the art style and music intact. I've seen some valid criticisms for some remasters and remakes, and I've seen some invalid ones. Here are some valid ones about the Resident Evil 4 remake. While I have zero issues with the remake's art style, as the originals always struck me as being more on the realistic side, the music, while still solid, is, in all honesty, a step down from the original's OST. Ada's voice acting is mediocre, or how the remake handled the interactions with villains. Communicating with them over the radio in the original really built a strong sense of rivalry between Leon and the villains, especially with Sadler, something that is absent in the remake. I do get what they were going for, making Sadler like this overarching antagonist who is an all-seeing god, but taking away the banter between Leon and the villains, including decreasing the amount of time Leon encounters them, made the game worse in the villains aspect. They also committed the sin of taking out some of Leon's iconic one-liners, like, "No thanks, bro." How dare you? You're sick. While many parts of the main campaign were either taken out and saved for separate ways, remixed, or didn't make the cut, period, because in all honesty they felt unnecessary, like the lava room and the castle. Though, whatever they took out from the original game, they more than compensated for with all the quality of life improvements to gameplay, adding in new one-liners for Leon, like this amazing one right here.
Guess your tap dancing days are over.
Or areas to explore. Truth be told, I didn't really care for the lava room anyway. Now, here's a bad example. I remember seeing a comment on Metacritic about the Metroid Prime too good looking to be a remaster, so might as well be a remake, where someone complained about Retro Studios changing the art style and how it lost the essence of the original. As someone who played both the original and the remaster, I strongly disagree. Art style is very important for a game. I do realize that. But they managed to graphically enhance the game while keeping the original art style and music intact, as a remaster or remake should. The Prime Remaster is one of the best examples of a game looking exactly how we thought it did as kids, and probably the best example of a remake/remaster of a game done right that I have ever played. If they made the remaster's art style cel-shaded, then I'd understand your criticism. In this situation, however, you're being ridiculous. Full stop. Let me give you an example of an art style not being suitable for a game. So the Insane Trilogy was well made, though it's not without its faults. While the music is still as good as it was in the originals, based off of what I remember, the realistic art style does not suit Crash at all. He, along with Spyro, always came off as being more on the cartoony side, something that Toys for Bob thankfully remedied in the fourth Crash game. Another invalid complaint from people when it comes to remasters or remakes especially is when they say something like,
"The remake will hurt the original by making it obsolete."
Isn't the whole point of a remake to make it new and improved? If it doesn't end up being the better experience of the two, then it kind of failed as a remake, whether you like it or not. As more time goes by, the original will become more and more outdated. I think remaking a game is a damn good way to keep its legacy alive. Also, if people get curious enough, they might check out the original. You can always go back to the original anytime you want. No one is taking that option away from you. It's not hurting the original. Stop being a silly dink. Alright, I think I've rambled on for long enough. Let me know in the comments below what games you would love to see remastered or remade. Then, we can collectively cry together, knowing full well they'll never happen.